All right, so if you have a function f of x and they want you to find f of -2, the only way we know how to do this up to this point is since the only difference between f of x and f of -2 is that we're taking the x out and we're plugging a -2 in. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm just going to put parentheses wherever you see an x, copying everything down in the function, in the equation. So instead of an x here, I'm going to plug the -2 in. So wherever I see an x, I'm plugging the -2 in. Notice I use parentheses everywhere because especially when you're substituting in or plugging in a negative, you'll have to be careful with the signs. So continuing, we work this out. -2 to the third power is -8. -2 to the second power is 4. This -3 times -2 is a positive 6. Bring down the plus 1. So now we have -8 plus 8 plus 6 plus 1, which -8 plus 8 is 0. So we end up with the answer of 7. All right, now I want to show you something else that's pretty neat about this. Before we've done synthetic division. So if instead of thinking about this -2 as your x value that you're going to plug in, think about that as your root. So let's review just a little bit here. Like if we wanted to factor this function, if we wanted to factor it, break it down, see what all everything that you could multiply to get it. We might have, maybe 3 different factors. And I don't know that this is a factor, but pretend like you had maybe x minus 1 was a factor. Well, if x minus 1 is the factor, then x equals positive 1 is your root. Because when you set the x minus 1 equal to 0, you actually get x equals positive 1. So keep in mind that when we're talking about x minus 1, that would be a factor of a polynomial or possible factor. When you're just talking about the number, that is your root, your x-intercept. All right, so over here we have this -2 here. So we're going to use that possible root on synthetic division. So we're going to take that -2 there. I've gotten a little too busy here. A lot of lines. So we're going to take that -2 and we're going to plug it into that polynomial. We're going to try synthetic division. So in front of the x cubed, you have a 1. In front of x squared, you have a 2. In front of the x, you have a -3. And then your constant back here is 1. Now, if there was a term that was missing, like let's say the x term was not there, you would have to put a 0 in that spot. If the constant was not there, you'd have to put a 0 in that spot. So let's look and see what happens when we do synthetic division on this. So we bring the 1 down, because really when you're going top to bottom, you're adding. So 1 plus nothing is 1. And then you multiply. -2 times 1 is -2. Then we add. Then we multiply. -2 times 0 is 0. Then we add. And then -2 times -3 is 6. And then we add. I want you to notice remember how this is the remainder? And then this would be the constant. This is your x, the first term, and this is your x, the second coefficient. Notice what the remainder is, and notice what this is. That happens every time. It's called the remainder theorem. Now, the reason that we might even be interested in this is when we are going to try to figure out factors of a polynomial. A polynomial that we can't factor by normal means. It's nothing, it's not a special case. It's not a trinomial. There's no GCF. We just have to do trial and error because that's where we're going to go with this. So when you're looking at that and you have to try things, you need a quick way to figure out if it's a factor. And if something goes in, like if the x minus 1 would have gone into this, if it would go into this polynomial evenly, then that means that the remainder would be 0. When something goes into something perfectly, the remainder is 0. So synthetic division is a really quick way to figure that out. All right, so we know right now that -2 is not a root of that polynomial up there because the remainder is 7. Now, if you compare this to this, synthetic division is quicker and it's not as messy. All right, you don't have to worry about all these negatives, and negative to the third power is still going to be a negative, but negative to the second power is going to be a positive. Okay, so synthetic division is where we're going to want to go with this. All right, so on page 278, and this video was made for the Reveal Algebra 2, and this is 2023. So number 3. On number 3, it tells us to find f of -5, and it tells us to find f of 2. Let's put that over here. It wants us to find both values using synthetic substitution. So instead of us plugging the -5 in for all those x values and then plug in the 2 in for the x values to get our answers, we're going to use synthetic division. So